Hi, I'm Steve Clemons, and I have a question. In a time when handshakes, rallies, fundraisers, and door knocking have all been canceled, what happens to the American election campaign this year? Let's get to the bottom line. Look at how fast things are changing around us. Here's how we started last week's show. Across the U.S. so far, about 5,000 cases of coronavirus have been recorded. Today, that number stands at closer to 50,000 and still rising. Listen to where the U.S. president was just 3.5 weeks ago.
We have it's the greatest tourism country in the world. So instead of leaving our country, leaving our shores, they'll stay here. And again, when you have 15 people, and the 15 within a couple of days is going to be down to close to zero, that's a pretty good job we've done.
Well, that aged like milk. So now that everything is turned upside down, travel plans, social gatherings, school, the way we shop and work, and of course the economy, wasn't it inevitable that election campaigning would have to change as well? Candidates on both sides have dropped all the traditional methods while normal life is put on hold. But how can you ask for donations when people are stuck at home and potentially unable to work? Should the candidates pretend to go on business as usual, or is that just tone deaf? And have we just ushered in the era of the digital-dominated campaign? Fortunately, we're joined by people who I hope have the answers. From Washington, D.C., Amy Dacey, former CEO of the Democratic National Committee and currently the executive director of the Sine Institute of Policy and Politics at American University. And Adam Goodman, a Republican media strategist. And over in Potomac, Maryland, Doug Thornell, a Democratic advisor and partner at SKDK, a political strategy firm. So glad you're all with us today. I'd like to just start with Amy for a minute and just ask you the question. Is there something sort of tin-eared, that's something off about campaigning while the nation is struggling as it is with coronavirus today? How do you bridge that, the fact that we're in an election season, but we also have one of the biggest challenges this nation has ever had?
I know. I mean, it's challenging. You would think with 110 million Americans under a stay-at-home order, you'd have a captive audience, but it's challenging. The bottom line is you have this environment where we used to be talking about the primary election, the general election, and then other news things, would come. But this is just everybody's focus, whether it's the health, aspect to it, the economic aspect to it. I think the election's kind of fallen behind that. And campaigns are just conversations with voters, but this is one of the most challenging conversations I've seen candidates have to have in quite some time.
Adam, let me ask you a question. If you were the mayor of Milwaukee or Charlotte today, would you welcome a party convention to your city?
Well, I was, of course, advocating not long ago, Steve, that we cancel all primaries until we get a handle on this, on COVID-19 and are ready to really focus on other things again. I think you have to give people hope, a sense of something to look forward to. I got this question yesterday about the Olympics. Should they cancel the Olympics? They now started talking about shifting that date. We have to set milestones ahead of us, I believe, just to give us a sense of optimism, something to look forward to that we can still, imagine could happen. With that said, I think the mayors of Charlotte and Milwaukee are very nervous right now. The last thing they want to do is hold a convention which bears with it any degree of personal risk to those who attend.
Well, Doug, I'm going to put the responsibility on you then. Tell us how a campaign today, say you're advising Bernie Sanders or you're advising Joe Biden, or you were to jump parties and advise President Trump. What happens to rallies? What happens to handshakes? What happens to the people standing behind the president on the stage or coronavirus hearings, which we've been seeing lately? What happens to all of that?
Well, Steve, it's a great question. First of all, no more rallies. No more rallies for the foreseeable future. You're not going to have the typical canvassing that occurs for voter contact, people going door to door. That's not going to happen. I think what you're going to see is a lot of virtual town halls. You'll see teletown halls. You'll see candidates. I know Vice President Biden's building a television studio in his house so he can do more interaction with folks from there. I think they're going to use their platforms, and all three have millions of people who follow them. Hopefully, they use them in a positive way to provide accurate information on what the current situation is. So there's a sort of balancing between traditional campaigning, but also doing a service to the people that follow you so that they're totally informed on what's happening. And the services, there's going to be a huge stimulus that gets signed in the next day or two. And a lot of people are going to need to understand how to access those funds.
I mean, the three of you are very, very significant in the scaffolding of the political parties that are out there playing different kinds of roles. And it just asks, are we going to stumble ahead into this, or is there going to be some master plan or sort of a new negotiation between parties on how this happens? I'm reminded today I put out today's topic out on Facebook, and I said, let's crowdsource this. Let's ask for some questions from the public. And I got some fascinating tidbits, things I didn't realize or had forgotten. Pamela Stevens writes that Ronald Reagan, because of the how cold it was in 1984, moved the inaugural parade indoors. I mean, that was it's different than a coronavirus pandemic, but it shows that change can happen. And I'm interested in how we get through this. Do we just stumble forward? Are we experimenting like we all are with a virtual campaign tour? Doug, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, Amy and Adam and myself have done countless numbers of campaigns, and I don't think any of us have done anything like it in a situation like this. So I'm not sure if finding senior advisors to be, the folks who are explaining how to do this. I don't think anyone knows how to operate in this field right now, and I think it is a little bit of sorting it out and figuring out and calibrating your message in a proper way so that it's not tone deaf. So I think a lot of these campaigns, whether presidential on down, are going to have to be, they're basically operating day by day.
Amy?
Yeah, I think it's not, are we replacing? Are we emphasizing more one area? Because, digital, online, these tactics that campaigns have used have been growing and growing over the last several cycles. But it's more that we're not able to use some of the traditional things that we've done, and we might have to overemphasize some of these online platforms. How are we going to, access and get to voters where they are? And especially having that conversation to persuade and help them understand. As Doug said, each of these individuals has a different platform. I mean, the president's having, a press conference every day. Senator Sanders is certainly, involved in the Senate and talking about, what work he's doing right now. Again, Vice President Biden set up this studio, but I think the challenge is you're overemphasizing one tactic in your toolbox where others you're not able to do because of the actual physicality and what we're under, with these health risks.
Adam, one of the questions that came in from Mike Demarest was, how would a negative campaign ad play out? So with so much more going to digital platforms, it's a really interesting question because we know that we always want to pretend earnestly that negative campaigning will not be part of the race, and then ends up dominating some of the largest races, and particularly President Trump has shown no aversion to that. But how will negative campaigning play out or be felt by people from your perspective?
Well, it will be received very poorly. Right now, what people want is a shot in the arm, not a shot across the jaw. And I think the normal playbooks are all out the window. Let me go back also, Steve, if I can, to the last question. What's happened in American politics in the last couple of years, and I know that Doug and Amy would reinforce this, the conversation has become nationalized. We saw that in a big way in 2016 with the now President of the United States using a kind of a national bully pulpit, less focused in the utilization of ads and the normal tools of the trade and more into going directly to the public. But the national conversation right now, which would have advantaged, I think, Joe Biden or Bernie Sanders or whoever the Democratic nominee is going to be up against ultimately President Trump, that national conversation is no longer about politics. And anyone that tries to inject politics into the conversation is kind of shouted down right now. And one thing that Amy just said about President Trump having daily press conferences, the best advertisement for the president are those press conferences. The best assurance that he has a good chance to win re-election is how he does with the coronavirus. Conversely, if he does not handle COVID-19 as deftly as people would prefer, I think that will work against him.
Adam, I hear what you're saying, but I want to play a clip for you of the president engaging a member of the press, Peter Alexander of MSNBC, at a coronavirus hearing, and it raises the question of whether you know, the president's eyeballs are on the virus and what's happening in the country, or the president is using this as if it's a campaign rally. Let's listen to the clip.
John, go ahead. Dead. What do you say the Americans were scared, though? I guess nearly 200 dead, 14,000 who are sick, millions, as you witnessed, who are scared right now. What do you say to Americans who are watching you right now who are scared?
I say that you're a terrible reporter. That's what I say. Go ahead.
I
I think it's a very nasty question, and I think it's a very bad signal that you're putting out to the American people. The American people are looking for answers, and they're looking for hope. And you're doing sensationalism, and the same with NBC and Comcast. I don't call it Comcast. I call it Concast.
So Adam, just back to you very quickly. That to me feels like campaign mode, not coronavirus briefing mode. Is there a difference, and should there be a difference?
Yeah, there's a difference, and I think you have a valid point. I think all of us will agree that's the president being the president. But there's a bigger message, I think, that he's trying to convey, and maybe it's not been, effectively done so to this point, which is a lot of the press and media, Steve, are really focused on gotcha. Yeah, they're trying to find ways to poke holes in the president's and the coronavirus task force efforts right now to get up to complete speed from a standing start. And anything they find that's inconsistent, that doesn't quite add up, they're going after with reckless abandon. I think that is bad for the media. I think their role right now is to inform, not to inflame. And I think it actually plays to the advantage of the president, who's saying, let's talk about what we're doing, what we need to do, as opposed to what I said 13 days ago, where I missed a particular word or a particular piece of information that I had to clarify, and suddenly that is blowing up, the internet. I think this is where we have to pull together, and that includes the fourth estate.
Well, I should note that Donald Trump's poll numbers are going up despite these moments of flare-ups. So it works. But I'm going to ask Amy to respond to something I have here. It was sent in by Matt Corradoni, and it is from Pete Buttigieg. It's a tweet from Pete Buttigieg, who's no longer in the race, but he's done something a bit different. And Pete Buttigieg writes, here in South Bend, a local organization that trains people in sewing skills has retooled to produce masks and support area medical providers. One more example of people figuring out how to make a difference, and they're looking for help. And this addresses the question to some degree of real social need out there. The protective gear, the masks, the other equipment, and asking folks to come together at the local level. But it's a politician who was one of the candidates for the Democratic nod on this race that is doing that. And Amy, I'm interested in whether that's a way to diminish that awkward feeling of campaigning during the era of the coronavirus.
Yeah, I think it's really important for anybody who is trying to challenge the current leadership to say that they're solution driven, so that they have ideas or that they highlight ideas of things that people are doing that are coming together. You see this a lot with Governor Cuomo's daily press conference as well, is talking about the need, talking about the challenge, but also highlighting things that are happening in the community that can benefit people or how people can engage. So, I think you've also seen with Vice President Biden, he's tried to show what his leadership would look like, solutions. He's calling around certainly to the leaders who are tackling these problems, but that is a part of it, is to try and show that empathy, that compassion, and that finding solutions for this. I think that's one of the struggles that people are really looking for right now, is how do we solve this when it's changing every week? And I think a leader can really highlight that and lean into that, like Mayor Buttigieg did, to show that there are solutions out there in the communities and also nationally. As we have said, these are nationalized, campaigns.
Doug, I don't know what you were up to a few years ago during the Hillary Clinton-Donald Trump race, but of course, one of the hangovers of that has been the place of political ads, meddling in elections, particularly digitally, by foreign governments. So, I don't think it'd be responsible to have this conversation without asking about these other two big elephants in the room. Russian-style meddling, again, as more and more goes into the digital space, and two, the controversy over Facebook and the kinds of political ads it's running. Twitter, I should note, has suspended running political ads. But is this just benefiting two of the players that have had dark clouds over their head? I'd be interested in your thoughts on whether or not we're ending up in the same court we were in 4 years ago.
Well, look, I think that's a really good question. I think you have to be on the lookout, and hopefully our intelligence community is on the lookout for that type of meddling, whether it's from Russia or North Korea or
Do you have
whoever it
confidence
is.
they are? I'm not sure I have confidence they are.
I have not had confidence that the administration has taken the whole issue of foreign meddling in our election seriously at all. I think that, look, there is an opportunity for these campaigns, at least in the short term, to position themselves as sort of constructive forces for good. And what I mean by that is, I got an email from a member of Congress that they sent out that was addressed to senior citizens, and it was about them being on the lookout for fraudulent and scam artists who are trying to take advantage of this moment of the COVID-19. And it wasn't political. It was them using their platform, using their office, and I think incumbents have an opportunity here to be that source of information, and they should use their digital channels. They should use Facebook. These folks should be doing Facebook Live interviews with experts every day to get that type of information. The American people are craving information, transparency. Even if it's bad news, they can handle that. They just want the truth.
Adam, I'd be interested in your reactions on that as well. I saw you nodding, and the question of whether these other platforms, whether we need to have now more significant governance. We have not invested at significant levels in protecting the elections and where they are. And it raises interesting questions that I think, Senator Amy Klobuchar and others have been pushing about mail-in ballots and moving to a different form of paper, if you will, as opposed to the digital side. But do the folks that you work with on the Republican side, do they look at this as a serious concern?
Well, I think it's a serious challenge for all of us, right? And a concern as well. In terms of where we're going to go, let me address something that Doug just kind of referenced in terms of giving information. And not to be combative or competitive, but I had a piece of advice, unsolicited, of course, for Joe Biden, who, let's just face it, short of something completely unexpected, Joe Biden's going to be the nominee of the Democratic Party and will take on President Trump in the fall. I said that the best thing that Joe Biden can do, beyond picking up on Doug's point, giving information out that may be helpful, especially in localized as much as possible, as opposed to just nationalized. I think Joe Biden should reach out to the President of the United States and say, look, we have a lot of things we disagree on, and we'll get to that as soon as we get COVID-19 in the rearview mirror. But right now, we're all in. What can I do? How can I help? I also have advocated that every living president be on the front lines of doing the same, banding together and saying, look, we have different opinions about all sorts of things, but on this, we are one. We need an A team, and the A here stands for America. And I think the more we are able to convey that finally, after all this divisiveness, there's just something we can really unite on and really rally around. The sooner we do that, I think the healthier we're going to feel about how we're going at this. And the final thing I want to add, the one thing you can count on right now, Steve, in terms of Americans who are now in some degree of hibernation, is that wonderful quality called innovation. We're going to innovate. So we don't have a lot of the answers to these great questions you're asking, but we're going to get them. We're going to have answers, and we're going to have things that we're going to do. We just simply haven't done before that will reflect the best in all of us.
Amy, you were the CEO of a big operation, a big party, and Adam just put a big idea on the table about, those that come together. Do you think what he just suggested is possible in what has really been a toxic political environment?
Right. I mean, I'd love to think that they could all come together and talk about these solutions. It's hard to see them wanting to engage in that way when the conversation that President Trump has on Twitter is very different than what that conversation, would be, and what he's presenting, in the public sphere. I do think that you do see pockets of people trying to come together. A lot of the negotiations are happening without President Trump, and you see how he's been reacting to that. So when you see leaders come together to try and figure out some of these solutions, it's hard in a polarized environment, but I think citizens are expecting it. I think that you see leadership about how you're going to execute on these things. You've seen governors turn to the president to ask for, federal help, that there's things that he could be doing. I would love to see that. I'm sure a lot of people would.
But it's a very powerful image just to think for a moment of George W. Bush, of Bill Clinton, of Jimmy Carter,
Sure.
Of Barack Obama coming out together and, telling folks to mail in their ballots or to participate in early voting or to participate in e-town halls and remain socially distanced. regardless of what the president, I mean, it'd be great if President Trump joined that, but what a fascinating image that would be. And I'm not normally a kumbaya kind of guy, but I think this is fairly interesting. And it's a powerful one. So I hope somebody watches this show and suggests it. But when you get down to it, I agree that it's a toxic time. But just as a structuralist, because you ran a big operation, how do you feel about the other part of what Adam just said about the ability to innovate? Because I find most decisions are driven by inertia, not by innovation. How hard is it going to be to change?
I think the challenges we're facing, people are going to find that, teams around these campaigns are already trying to think of new and creative ways to reach people and reach individuals. You've got people thinking through in this current environment. It's one thing to campaign, it's another, and I think we have to put a lot of attention to how are people going to actually have the access to vote? We can say we're moving to vote by mail, but do we have the infrastructure put in place to do that? And I think that you've seen innovation. You've seen people like Mayor Buttigieg highlighted that are trying to take these opportunities. We saw 3M, and Ford working today is how can they change some of their systems in order to provide the things that are necessary. So I do think that you can, take advantage of the situation you're in. I think the challenge for a lot of us is it's changing every hour. It's changing every day as well.
Let me just get a snapshot from each of you in our last couple of minutes. Doug, if you just give me a snapshot of the most important things that we should do to move the system forward, not get trapped in this paralysis of not being able to go out and engage politically. What would you put on the table, Doug?
Well, actually, I think what Governor Cuomo has been doing in New York has been super effective. He's been doing just sort of straightforward, no-nonsense press conferences on a regular basis. They aren't campaign rallies, and I feel like the response to them have been very positive. They're not necessarily, it's not Trump style, but I really like how he's going about things. So transparency, putting out all the information, and being honest with folks.
Would you cancel or hold the conventions, Doug?
Well, at this point, I would cancel them.
Adam, let me get your snapshot of what you'd like to put on the table, and tell me as well what you do with the conventions.
I'm really, well, first of all, in terms of the convention, and this is probably something that Amy can address, technically both the RNC and the DNC, they disband as they come to the convention, then they're reconstituted by a vote of the people, the delegates who are there. Obviously, if the delegates aren't there, they're going to have to change the rule to allow for virtual voting to reconstitute both, or they're out of business. But I want to pick up on something that Doug said. And take it one step further. He was talking about Governor Cuomo, and I think Governor Cuomo is doing an amazing job. He's right there on the front lines. I've helped in the past Rudy Giuliani when he was going through 9/11. I understand what it means when everything's happening and it's happening fast, and you've got to give people not just information but a vote of confidence. And I think Cuomo's doing a great job of that. I think Governor Newsom in California is doing a terrific job. I hope that they would band together, those governors, and they're starting to, with the president, the administration, with Dr. Fauci and his incredible team of advisors, and deliver one message to the American people, which is we're going to be okay.
Thank you for that, Adam. And I'm going to give you, Amy, the last word.
Well, I will go back just to the conventions. I think you have to modify. These are, in their original form, a party meeting. They've become a media event. So the party business still has to happen. There are certain things that has to happen for the election. I just think in this time we have to modify for the world that we live in. I think you'll still see the process move forward, but I think you have to make a change in the way the convention's going to look and how it's operated.
Thank you for such a thoughtful exchange. I'd like to thank you all for being with us under these circumstances. Former Democratic National Committee CEO Amy Dacey, Executive Director of the Sine Institute at American University, and Republican media strategist Adam Goodman, and Democratic media advisor Doug Thornell from the strategic communications firm SKDK Knickerbocker. Stay physically distant, but emotionally close. Thank you, folks, very much.
Thank you.
A big shout out here to all of those who sent their brilliant comments and questions on my Facebook page. So what is the bottom line? If Americans are looking up to local leaders like New York Governor Andrew Cuomo for their guidance and compassion, then we have a serious problem at the level of our national leadership. But Americans, like all other people in the world, are resilient and innovative. They will, and they should, pay more attention to their families and their health. Those are the important things. And they should pay less attention to the long-winded elections process in this country. They'll tune in when they feel the time is right. As for the political conventions as we used to know them, bye-bye for now. And that's the bottom line.